Good.
Great.
So Dan, I'm just going to make a couple comments and then we can get started. It's 9 o'clock Central Time, and I know we said we'd start at 9. And to be respectful of everybody who showed up on time, I think we should just go ahead and get started so we stay within our time frame today. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm Lynn Cahote with the Department of Economic Development. I lead our housing team. And hopefully this is probably the second training that you've participated in since your grant has been, or your project has been awarded. So second training regarding AmpliFund. So today, Dan with AmpliFund is going to walk us through and introduce you guys to the financial side of AmpliFund and start to get you familiarized and comfortable with how you're going to be tracking your expenses and documenting your expenses in AmpliFund, and then starting to look at how you begin to draw funds in AmpliFund. We may have to have some follow-up trainings to today. We'll kind of see how it goes. But again, as we've said in the beginning, you guys are our first housing projects to go through AmpliFund, to go through our new system. So your continued patience, understanding, and just your learning with us we really value that. So thank you for your patience, your understanding, and just so you know, our team is learning along the way too. So your questions, your comments are valuable to us because we're learning from your projects. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan, Dan, I believe you're going to share your screen with us and start walking us through the system. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lynn, and thanks everyone for joining today. You know, like Lynn said, appreciate everyone making the time and being here, and you know, and helping us kind of help you get through a lot of this information in the system and kind of this first project that we're doing for housing in AmpliFund. So again, thanks for joining, and we'll get started with the planned material for today. As Lynn mentioned, we'll be going through and discussing some of the financial reporting options and some of the financial reporting that's going to be taking place within the system. So one thing that I wanted to establish in the beginning, it just kind of provide an overview of the actions and the steps that you'll be completing within the system. So I have a slide that kind of outlines those steps. We also have some support documentation that DED has compiled that will help you kind of like desk guides that'll kind of walk you through step by step to aid in the process as well. So first, we're going to go through those specific actions that you'll be completing in the system. And then we'll actually be jumping into the system, and I have an example set up that I'll walk everybody through in terms of kind of, you know, how these specific actions can actually be performed, and, you know, what other things there are to note as you're performing these different actions. You'll notice here on the slide that I have some time reserved towards the end for some question and answer. You know, I'll definitely make sure that we leave time for a Q&A session, but also we would encourage you to, you know, ask questions throughout. There's the chat feature. Like Lynn mentioned, a lot of you were probably already on our first session. So feel free to utilize that chat feature and submit questions. If there's anything that we can't get to during the presentation, we'll definitely make sure that there's time for it during the Q&A session. And then, of course, I also just want to make sure that we have time to go over your support options, whether it's AmpliFund support, whether it's support that's offered directly by DED. Just want to make sure that you have the tools and the resources at your disposal. So to get started, as I mentioned, first thing I want to do is just kind of outline some of the steps that we'll be walking through today and the specifics of the processes that we'll be completing in the system. So, you know, the first bullet point that I have up here is logging into AmpliFund. The Nebraska DED has their own specific URL, ne.amplifund.com. One thing that I want to remind everybody here in terms of accessing AmpliFund is that you don't have to install an app on your computer or download anything or install any hardware or anything like that onto your computer. AmpliFund is available to you wherever you have a web browser and an internet connection. So you can access AmpliFund at your work computer by going to that URL, ne.amplifund.com. And then also, when you're working from home, like so many people are these days, again, you just need open up a web browser, go to ne.amplifund.com, and you'll be able to type in your username and your unique password to log into your account. So just wanted to remind everyone that as well. It's always good to also just kind of bookmark that URL so you have it at your disposal. Whenever you log in, it's always kind of a click away. So what we'll be doing today after we log into AmpliFund is we'll be reviewing the budget and how the budgets are set up. I know a lot of you have probably already seen some of the budget and interacted with how that budget looks, but just to kind of set up, the example that we're looking at, I wanted to review it, go over some of the details on it, some of the important things to note. And then we're really going to get into a lot of the tracking and a lot of the reporting that starts to take place for your specific project that happens in AmpliFund. So we'll walk through the process of how you can record specific expenses for your project and how you can add source documentation to those expense records. So we'll go through that process together. AmpliFund has a monthly expense report feature. That's part of the expense reporting and the drawdown process. So I'll discuss how to generate those monthly reports and submit those to your DED program rep. And then we'll talk about the drawdown request itself, how the drawdown will be submitted electronically through AmpliFund, how the drawdown form fits in there as well. So kind of walking through that entire process of reviewing the budget, adding expenses, submitting a report with those expenses, and then submitting the drawdown request. And then finally, what I want to touch on too are some of the tools that are available to you as an AmpliFund user that are in your account, such as different reports that you can run that aren't necessarily required by DED, but may be helpful to you as you're managing the project, as you're managing your own project and you're tracking your expenses and your drawdown requests and everything. So that's what we're going to cover today. In addition, I'll be walking through some of the other items like, where you can access support, where you can access help. And we'll be taking questions as they come. If you want to submit those in the chat, and then during a Q&A session towards the end. All right, so I'm going to switch my screen over now, and we are going to get started with the in-product portion, the in-AmpliFund demo part of today's presentation. So I'm going to get my screen switched over here. All right. So when we're walking through AmpliFund and, when we first log in utilizing our unique URL, since it has been a while since we've been together during a session, I just kind of wanted to remind everyone of some basic navigational elements that you'll notice. When you first log in, you'll have the calendar showing up on your screen here, and the calendar will most likely feature any tasks that DED program reps have created for you to complete, or any upcoming events or reports that may be due. Some of those items will show up on your calendar here. There are three main pieces of navigation. The first main piece of navigation is your left navigation menu, and this is essentially where we're going to be looking at mostly today. We're going to be accessing your grant or your award from DED, so that's going to live in the grant management section. We're also going to take a look at some reports. So we'll be looking into the report section today as well. Couple of other items I just wanted to point out before we actually get into the process of, looking at our grant, looking at our budget, and going through with the financial reporting process. The other two navigational elements that you'll notice is your user drop-down menu here at the top. So when you log in, this should have your name listed. You'll be able to click on the drop-down, and you'll be able to access account information. You'll be able to change your password, view a message center that's going to contain messages that come from AmpliFund, access help and support, which the help and support option is also available on the options toolbar here, which is the third main piece of navigation I wanted to point out. This options toolbar is going to be present on every screen we look at. Just depending on the screen that we're on, the options may vary. So a lot of the action items that we're going to be taking today, like when we want to create something, or we want to edit something, those action items, those buttons will be located here in the top right-hand corner. And if you're ever not sure what one of the options does, you can always just hover your mouse over it and it'll tell you exactly what that option does. So with that being said, the first thing that we want to do today, when we're logging in, when it comes to expense tracking and financial reporting, is I want to look at the award itself. So as I mentioned before, we're going to be spending a lot of time today in this grant management section in our left navigation menu, because in order to actually access our award, our grant, we go to grant management and grants. And when I click here, I'll be able to pull up and access any of my projects that I currently have for this year's housing projects. So I'm going to click the green hyperlink, which should be the name of your project, the name of my project here, and this is going to provide me with access into my award. So when I click on that hyperlink, I have a lot of different options that I'm looking at here, a lot of information on my screen. When you first click into the award, the first thing that you notice, the first thing that you see here on your screen is going to be a lot of what we would call award details. And there's just a lot of good information here in terms of, being able to see what your total overall awarded amount is. This is the total budget is the overall amount. The grant funded amount indicates, the grant funded, and then the match requirement indicates, any match that you may have that may be approved. There are a lot of fields here that we call dynamic fields, because as soon as we start entering information like expenses, as soon as we start processing invoices, submitting drawdowns, then these fields will automatically update. So right now they're showing a 0 because I haven't done anything yet on my project. But as soon as we start entering information like we will today, we'll circle back to this page so you can take a look at how you can view information related to your financials and your expenses when you see all of these start to add up. And then some other parts of this page that you should be familiar with already, just from any previous work that you've done, whether it's been on the special conditions or any of the initial steps that were part of the first session that we went in. You'll be able to see your DED program reps here. A recipient grant manager should have been added already. That's a grant manager from your organization on your side. And then key dates for your award. And then again, kind of a look or a view into some of these specific awarded amounts that you'll be interacting with. So this award details page, again, has a lot of information on it. But at this point, I want to transition and start to look at our budget, because the goal and the intended outcome of today's session is to have walked through all the financial reporting aspects. So if I want to go and I want to look at the budget section, then I locate here in the top of my award details page, I look at the post-award drop-down menu, I go to financial, and I go to budget. So when I click into the budget, this is going to provide me with the approved budget amounts that per the approved contract that we have. So from this view, I'll be able to see what my specific activities are for my project. There's also line items per activity that you'll be able to see here. You'll be able to see per activity, you'll be able to see your grant funded amount and your match amounts here. So if you have specific, specific match per category, you'll be able to see that. I can see that, like on my housing, there's nothing that I have indicating to me that I have any match here, but this is what the budget view is going to look like when you look at it. It shows a breakdown of the activities, grant funded, and then the match, and then it gives you the totals here as well. So this is a good reference point. This is a good place to start, when we're ready to start with our financials. It's always good to review the budget and the information that's in here, because this will provide kind of a good overview of what's been approved, what's agreed upon here. So when I want to start actually reporting on some of these items, when I have expenses and I want to submit a drawdown, then the first part of the process, as I mentioned in the overview, is to add in expenses. And there are a few different ways that we can add in expenses. So one way, which is pretty straightforward, is as I'm looking at each of my activities. If I wanted to add an expense for rehabilitation, I can just click the dollar sign here next to any one of my line items. That's going to take me to the page where I create expenses. So regardless of what type of expense I want to create for which activity I'm recording an expense for, I can just click the dollar sign next to any of these line items. That will allow me to create an expense. There's another way that you'll be able to access the expense page, which is via the Post Award tab, going to Financial, and going to Expenses. Again, this is going to take you to the same place. It's just an alternate way to get there. And then there's a third way to get to your expenses, which is via this activity section here. You click Activity and go to Expenses. That also takes you to your expense page. So 3 different ways to get to the same place. I think the way that you prefer will be up to you, and how you feel most comfortable, or depending on the starting point. Like if you don't want to have to access and go into your grant, then you can just log into AmpliFund and just go directly here, for example. You may want to view your budget first and look at each activity and access it through here, or you can always go to, again, Post Award, Financial, and Expenses, and it takes you to the page where you can create expenses. 3 different ways to get to the same place. All of those options take you to the same page. So one thing that I wanted to point out, which is a key feature of this expense page allows you to do 2 things. It allows you to create expenses, and it also allows you to view any expenses that you've already created. So you'll notice that there's a number of categories up here that you can filter through. So you can indicate, if you want to run a quick report to see any expenses you've already entered, you can choose a time frame, or you can customize a time frame. You can choose a project. So if you have more than one project, you'll be able to select from the dropdown which project you want to see expenses for. You'll be able to select a category if you want to focus in on one specific category and a line item as well. And then you'll click Run, and that will generate a list of any expenses you've already entered. Now, since this is my first time doing this, I don't have any expenses that I've entered already, so I'm not trying to utilize this feature just yet. What I want to do when I'm on this expense page is I want to begin to create expenses. So I've already had expenses for my project. I'm ready to add those in here to AmpliFund and then submit that drawdown, to request funds from DED. So this is where that process begins. To add an expense, you go here where it says Actions here in the middle of your screen, and you click on the plus sign to begin to add in your expenses. So this is what the expense creation page looks like. We're going to spend some time here as we kind of go through the expense creation process. one thing you'll always see at the top is you'll see the name of the grant that you're entering in an expense for. You'll be able to select the budget category that you're adding in an expense for. So we're going to start with my rehab activity, and I'm going to add in an expense against this rehab activity. As we're looking here in the direct cost field, this is actually going to be the total amount of the expense that I'm entering. So one thing to note here is when I say it's the total amount of expense, it means that I'm including the expenses that need to be tracked against the match amount and the grant funded amount. And also keep in mind that if you have any match on a particular activity or on a particular category, we need to make sure that we're spending that down first. So for example, I have a total expense that I've already spent on my rehab project of $100,000. Now, $40,000 of that $100,000 is match. So when I type in my direct cost, I'm going to type in the overall amount here. It's $100,000. But then I also need to make sure that I'm spending down my match first. So in order to indicate that $40,000 of my expense is a matching expense, I type in my $100,000 here, and I go to my financials tab. And here, where it says cash match amount, I'm going to be able to enter in the dollar amount of this that's match. So I'll click on dollar to indicate that I'm adding in a dollar amount. And remember, we have to spend down our match first. So since there's $40,000 of match allocated to this category, I want to type in $40,000. And you'll note here that as soon as I type that in, it shows me the breakdown of the expense that I'm adding. Again, here's the total amount of the expense. $40,000 is the match amount that I've entered. And then $60,000 is the expense that's being spent down against the grant funded amount. Now you're more than welcome to, you can add in, if you're matching more than just the $40, you can absolutely put that in here. There's nothing that will stop you from that. So if you actually want to match and go over the $40,000, $45,000, then you can absolutely do that. Just enter in the total amount of match. There's going to be nothing that prevents you from indicating how much match you've spent. Nothing is going to stop you from spending more than the set $40,000 amount. Just wanted to let you know. So we have our match amount in there. This is starting to look right to me because again, I have to spend down the match first. So here's my 40,000, 60,000. The total cost is 100,000. As I scroll down, there's other key details here, which are important and that are going to come into play when it comes to our reporting. So one thing that you'll note here is this created by field. The created by field is always going to just auto-populate. It will default to your username. Whoever is logged in and entering expenses, that will show on the record who's entering the expense. So I'm logged in as Mr. Recipient here, and that's why Mr. Recipient's email is showing up. The next field, which is, again, really important when it comes to reporting, is this expense date field. I mentioned before that one of the reporting elements that we'll be completing today, and that is a key feature of using AmpliFund, is the monthly expense reporting that contributes to the drawdown request. So it's important to get this date accurate. It will auto default, it will auto populate or default to today's date. But if I'm reporting expenses that I've incurred, in September, then I want to make sure that that's reflected here on this expense date. So when I'm reporting this $100,000, I probably didn't spend it all today. It's still pretty early for that. But maybe I spent it in September. So I'm going to use my calendar button and choose September here on the calendar, and then choose the date that I've actually expensed this item. Again, this is going to determine, which months and which reports this is going to fall into. For example, if I'm generating a report for September, or if I'm generating a report for August, then I will not expect this to show up because this has a September date on it. So when I'm generating my September dates, I can expect this to show up. So that's really important, the expense date right there. Here on expense status, you have all these options. The option to choose is reviewed. When you're creating an expense, every expense needs to be marked as reviewed in order for it to roll up into your report and into your drawdown. So you can mark it as reviewed here. You can mark it as reviewed after you create it, but the recommendation and the easiest thing to do is as you're creating an expense, mark it as reviewed. This will ensure that the expense automatically rolls up into the report that you're submitting to DED, and you won't have to do any duplicate entry. The description field here is available for you if you wanted to add any details. What is truly important when it comes to creating the expense outside of the things that we've already discussed, like adding in the match, the expense date, and marking your expense as reviewed, is this attachments tab that you'll see here. On every expense, the source documentation needs to be attached for each expense. So utilize this attachments field right here, this attachments tab, and upload any source documentation you have for this expense. Go to choose file. You'll be able to upload one or multiple documents if necessary to this. But at minimum, I can just upload one. And now I'm ready to create my expense. So really important, again, just to kind of do some review. When we're creating our expense, we're putting in the direct cost, which is the total amount that we're expending against the grant funded and the match, remembering that we have to draw down the match, spend down on the match first. We can go to our financials tab, and in this cash match amount section, add in the actual amount of match that we're spending down, which can be, over the amount that's allocated as well. That's definitely allowed. We have the expense date, which is going to determine which month, this expense shows up when we run our reports and when we submit our draw. And then we have the expense status being marked as reviewed so that this rolls up into our reports. And we have our attachments tab where we have to upload our source documentation for this individual expense. Once we have all of that created and completed here, I can go ahead and click on create. And I have created my first expense. One of the nice tools that you'll have available to you when you're actually looking at the expenses that you're creating is you'll notice that, I created an expense and then my expense record showed up here. You'll also notice that there's a number of columns that are showing that are providing information about my expense. You can configure these columns however you want to show, whatever information that you need. So if you look at these options here at the top, I can see anything that's checked in blue is a column that's appearing here. Anything that's not checked is something that I can add in to look at my expense. So I know there's no in-kind, so you can check this off. As soon as you check it off, it goes away. There's no payee, so I can remove the payee. If I wanted to see maybe the category that I'm actually tracking against, I check the category box, so I can see that here. Some good ones that I always utilize, total budgeted, total expensed, total remaining. That's usually pretty useful information when it comes to, creating our expenses and submitting our draws. This is just one area where you can see this type of information. So as soon as you have expenses, I'm sorry.
Oh, hi, Dan, it's Lynn.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's okay.
I just thought it was important to note that you just mentioned in-kind and showed them where the in-kind is. Since we do not have in kind, we know that applicants report it in their application, but we do not track it in the contract. And so it's important to note that you will not be reporting in kind in AmpliFund. Just a point of clarification.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I thought it was important to say that at this time.
Yes, no, I appreciate that. You'll be able to review your expense and the details here. And then when you're ready to add more expenses, you just repeat the same process. So I want to add another expense that I'm going to be submitting a drawdown for. So just like I did previously, I find my plus sign here, I click on it, and now I'll be able to add an additional expense. So I already added an expense for my rehab activity. I'm going to add one here for housing management now. So I click on housing management. Here under the direct cost, again, I'm going to put in the total amount of the expense in this direct cost. And in this example, I'm going to have $1,000. Now, I'm going to add in an example of an expense that I'm adding that does not have any match on it. So you have two options. You can either check this box that says exclude from match, and then that means that when you go to your financials tab, you can't add any match for this particular expense. Or even if you leave this unchecked, just don't enter in anything here. Leave your matches zeros, and then you'll be able to just continue creating this as $1,000 that's not matched. So I have my $1,000 that I'm reporting an expense for here. Everything else still applies where I'm putting in, the specific date of my expense. So again, I'm just going to continue to report on expenses for the month of September. So I'm going to put my true expense date in here, the date that I want to be reflected in the draw and in our reports. Expense status, I want to mark as reviewed because I want this to roll up into our reports and our draw. And then on the attachments tab, same rules apply. We need to attach the specific source documentation for this expense on the expense record itself. So I go to attachments, I go to the upload files button, I click on upload files, I find my expense docs or my source documentation, wherever it's saved, wherever it's located. I double click and I attach it in here. I review my expense here just to make sure that it looks good and that it looks correct. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on create when I'm ready to create that expense. As I'm looking at my expenses here, if I realize that I put in $1,000 and really what I meant to do is put in $100. You can always go back and you can edit your expense by clicking on the pencil icon, and then that'll open your expense back up and you'll just be able to edit it to whatever the correct amount is. One thing that I'll mention about the editing process is you'll be able to edit expenses up until the point where you submit the drawdown to DED. So you can imagine, that once expenses are created and submitted as part of a drawdown request, changes can't be made to that expense unless the drawdown request gets rejected. So you can edit the expense at this point up until the point where you submit your report and your drawdown. I have one more activity and one more expense that I want to add in here. So for September, I can go ahead and I can click on the plus sign, and you can add in as many expenses as you need. It doesn't have to be just one per activity. You may have multiple expenses for rehabilitation or for housing management on different days that were for different things. You can add in as many expenses as you need by just walking through the same process, clicking that plus sign, entering the total amount for each expense. I'll add in another $1,000 here. This time, again, I want to exclude it from the match, so I'm going to do that here. My expense date, I want this to reflect the September expense, And on the expense status, I will not mark this as reviewed because I want to show you an example of what happens if you don't mark this as reviewed. So, there may be a scenario where you look at it and you forget. I'll show you how you can be reminded to mark expenses as reviewed. So I populate this. We still always are going to need our source documentation attached here. I'm going to attach it in, and I'm going to create my expense. When you're looking at your expenses, again, you'll be able to see a lot of that detail that I was highlighting in some of the reporting options here and some of the different columns that you can turn on and off. One thing that's also really good to note, before you submit your documentation is you can review the expense status and you can see which ones have been marked as reviewed and which ones haven't. And another really good, really useful tool for you if you want to utilize to track your own expenses here you can run these reports, you can configure the columns to configure the view, and then in your icon toolbar in the top right hand corner, you can export this into Excel. This is not a requirement from DED. This is just a suggestion, or this is just one of those reporting options that you'll have at your disposal because you're utilizing the system. So once you have all of your expenses entered and you want to request your draw and you want to submit to DED, then we move on to the next step. So the first step is add in any expenses that you want to submit for. The next step is what we call in AmpliFund the reporting period. This is what I was mentioning previously about, you'll have the ability to roll these up into a monthly expense report that gets submitted and that gets rolled up into the drawdown request. So you can access the reporting period by going to post-award, management, and reporting periods. So here, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating that monthly report that's going to generate for us, that's going to contain all of the expenses that we've entered for the month that we're generating a report for. So in order to generate my monthly report, I go into the top right-hand corner here in the options toolbar, and I click on the create button. This is going to ask me, what type of reporting period am I including? Am I creating? Is it it's an expenses report? It's a financial report. At this point, this will be your option here. You'll be able to select a time period, and this is going to generate in intervals, in monthly intervals. So I mentioned that the reports that we're creating are on a monthly basis, and it's going to just default to monthly intervals here. So since I want to create a monthly expense report, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select the month of September here so I can create my monthly expense report. When I'm ready to create my expense report, I'm going to go ahead and click on Save. And that's going to generate my monthly report. So once I generate this reporting period, I'll see some key details here of my month. So here I have the start and the end date. So again, since this is in monthly intervals, this is going to reflect in as the month of September. It shows me that this is my expenses report. A couple of things that are really important to note. There's not a lot that you have to do when it comes to the reporting period. What is important is just kind of paying attention to some of the key numbers that are listed in here. So here you'll see your total awarded amount. This is your overall awarded amount. Here, what you'll see is your total expense amount for the period. Watch this closely and make sure that this is accurately reflecting the total sum of the expenses that you want in your report that you want to submit a draw for the month of September. You'll note here that, and this little tooltip will tell you that this is only going to include reviewed expenses. So remember when we were creating the expenses, and I mentioned that, we mark our expenses as reviewed so that they automatically roll up into the reporting period. Because there was that one expense that I did not mark as reviewed, I have this number here that shows me number of unreviewed expenses 1. Our expectation should be, and the intended outcome is that we are marking all of our expenses as reviewed and that this number shows as 0. Since I have one expense that has not been reviewed, it is not rolling up into this total amount. But the fact that this 1 shows up right here means that I can click on it and it'll take me directly back to my expenses so that I can make sure that I can edit it, I can change it to reviewed, and then it'll total up and add into my report. So it took me back to this expense page where now I can just run a list of all my expenses for that month. And I can see, oh, look, I have that one expense that's not reviewed. If you want to review your expenses, you have 2 options. One is you can edit the expense and you can make sure that it's marked as reviewed, or you can utilize the select all feature. So imagine if you entered in 10 expenses and none of them were marked as reviewed, you didn't want to go in and individually edit each expense. You can utilize the select all feature here and then click on the check mark to make sure that all are marked as reviewed. Click on the check, mark all expenses as reviewed. You'll note that this one just updated from new to reviewed. So my expectation here is that now when I go back to my reporting period, because these are all reviewed, my total amount of all these expenses is going to show up in that reporting period, and the number of unreviewed expenses should show as 0. So I'm going to go to post-award management reporting periods to access my monthly report. Here it is, because we already have it generated. I'm going to click on the month, and now it shows me that accurate sum total of all the expenses, and it shows me that I have 0 unreviewed expenses. If you mark all of your expenses as reviewed, as you're going through the creation process, then you won't have to, click this number and go back into it. So we generate this reporting period, and then really at this point, all you have to do is scroll down. There's a number of analytics that you can look at, that you can use. There's really nothing else you have to do on here except for submit this to your program rep at DED. And the way that you submit is by clicking on the close button here. So you have 2 options: either close it out and submit it, or you can save it. So if you know, for example, that you're going to be adding in, more expenses, maybe later today or tomorrow, and you don't just want to close out the month of September yet, just save it. You'll always be able to come back to it and access it and submit it later. If I'm ready to submit it, then I can go ahead and click on close here. And when I click close, I receive this notification here that is telling me, as soon as I submit this, as soon as I close this out, I cannot make any additional changes to the expenses that I have for September. Also, I will point out that as soon as you do click this close button and submit it, an automatic notification goes to whoever your program rep is at DED, notifying them that you've completed this process and that you've submitted this monthly report. So you'll notice when I click on close, I can scroll down here. I don't have any more options. I can go up and I can see that it's closed. Now that my reporting period has been closed, we're 2/3 of the way through the process of submitting the draw. We've entered in the expense. We've created the reporting period for those expenses. Now we actually go in and submit the draw itself. So I'm going to go back to my reporting periods here by clicking on the reporting periods tab at the top. Here I'll see my reporting period, and now I'll be able to create my drawdown request. So there's two ways that you can create your drawdown request. One is by going to the post-award, cash flow, and payment requests. This will allow you to generate a drawdown request. In AmpliFund, the drawdowns are called payment requests, so that's why you're seeing it called payment request here. That's one way you can do it. The other way you can do it is after you close your reporting period, this little icon populates here and allows you to click directly on the icon to generate the payment request. So I'm going to click here, and it's going to take me right to the drawdown request section here, and it's going to allow me to indicate certain options. So here we have to give our payment requests a name. Because this includes my September expenses, I'm going to call this my September draw. The date created, even though it's for September, I can choose whatever date I need to choose here. So I'll just choose today's date because that's when I'm creating this. The submission date will auto-generate. So there's going to be two date fields, the date that this is created and then the date that it's submitted. That will auto-generate based on the actual date and time that the submission button is pressed down here. But we'll get to that in a second. So we'll have our date created, related reporting periods. Again, it's really important to have the reporting periods connected to your drawdown request so that all the expenses that you've entered roll up. You can have one drawdown request that has multiple reporting periods into it. So if you had any other months that you have expenses that you've closed out, you can add, one or multiple reporting periods into a drawdown request. It doesn't have to be a one-to-one relationship. Here on the payment type, you're going to indicate the type of request, reimbursement or advance. These are all going to be reimbursement. Payment request status is hard-coded in. It's not submitted because we haven't submitted anything yet. We haven't done anything yet. And then we scroll down. So previously, when I was talking about having the expenses automatically roll in to the payment request, this is exactly what I was talking about. Because I generated this payment request off of this reporting period, all of our expenses that we entered are automatically rolled into the request that we're going to be submitting to DED. So here I can see that the total amount for rehabilitation is $100,000. The total expensed amount for housing management is $1,000. The total for general admin is again $1,000. It shows me that $40,000 of this is in match, and remember, because we entered in that match as an expense there, it gives me the total amount that we're requesting here. And now because the total amount that we're requesting, because the total amount that we're requesting is going to be a little bit different than what the net total is, because this total amount here shows match. So what we need to do is actually reflect, this total amount minus the 40,000. So here, what we need to do is type in the actual amount that we're requesting from DED. So the total amount less the match. Adjusted match, we're not going to be using at all because any match that we're recording there is going to be on the expense level. And you'll see that when I delete that expense amount, then it automatically totals up the amount that I need to request here. And I just type that in one more time for verification's sake, adding in the 62,000. So that's the total amount that we're requesting on this particular draw. We'll always be able to see our balances here. So this will start to update, and you can click on this amount and it'll show you some basic details like the total amount of expenses you've entered, match contributions. If you've already submitted draws that have been approved, that type of information will show up here. Now, really important to note as well, before you actually get in and before you submit your payment request, is uploading the drawdown form. So one of the key tenets of this is, I'm sure you all know, is having that drawdown form filled out with the 2 signatures on it. That will go here as an upload on your payment request. So just to show an example here, one of the things that I wanted to point out as well is on this drawdown form, this is what we'll be uploading into the payment request. So I have a drawdown form that I have generated here, just kind of based on this example that I'm using here. So this is going to be our drawdown form. What's important to note is here is, again, attaching this drawdown form with the signatures here on your payment request. In the additional information section, click choose file, pull up the drawdown form, and make sure that's attached in to the request for reimbursement. You can add in any comments you would like. Not a lot of requirements here, but if you wanted your program manager to know something or to particularly look at something, you'll be able to do that here. So make sure that at least we have our requested amount in there, that everything looks good, and that we have our drawdown form uploaded. If there's additional information that needs to be added after the fact, maybe you're not yet ready to submit this drawdown request, then just go ahead and click on create, and that'll save this, and you'll always be able to come back into it and then submit it again. Once you're actually ready to submit, then you'll be able to click the submit button right here. And as soon as you click on submit, you'll get this notification, similar to the notification that we saw before, that once this is submitted, changes cannot be made to the request, and that also when this is submitted, a notification goes to the program rep at DED that you've submitted your drawdown request. So again, just making sure that the amounts are in there, that the draw form is attached, and then click on submit. Once you click on submit, you'll be able to see here that your payment request status updates to submitted. The date submitted, this is what I mentioned before, you'll be able to populate the date created, and that's what I did in that one field, but the date submitted, system generates based on the true date that it was submitted. You'll be able to see here who submitted it from your organization. You'll also be able to scroll down, and you'll see here at the bottom, there is a payment request history section. So any activity that is performed on this will be recorded in this payment request history section. As soon as your program rep at DED and the housing team takes a decision and either approves or rejects your draw, if whether it's approved or rejected, you'll receive a notification of that. You'll be able to see any comments that they add in. And then that information will all be added here to the audit trail at the bottom. And then whatever it is that you go and you resubmit, that gets added in to the audit trail. And then additionally, when you have your payment requests that have been submitted, you can go into the top right-hand corner here, and you can save this as a PDF, or you can also print this as well, or you can, save as a PDF via the print to PDF feature here. So a couple of nice options if you need to have, some hard copy records for your documentation. You'll also be able to view that through here. But at this point, because I've gone in and I've clicked submit, this is already submitted for review to my program rep at NDED. So in terms of the process of reporting this and submitting the drawdown, this completes the third of 3 steps. Those 3 steps, again, which are going to be outlined in the documentation that I'll share with you here shortly. The 3 steps are: first, we create the expenses. We generate the reporting period for the month or months that those expenses were incurred. And then we create the payment request that rolls all that up and gets submitted to our program rep at NDED for review. If you want to see a list of payment requests that you've submitted or anything that you have, regardless of status, click on that payment requests button, and this will generate any payment requests you have in your list here. What's useful is that it'll show you, what tracking period, what report that's in. It'll show you your key dates here. It'll show you the status. And once the decision is made, you'll be able to view that here in the decision date section. And if you ever want to just go back in and, review that payment request, if you thought maybe you didn't want to print it before, but you want to print it now, you'll always be able to go back in and print it out and view the details of it. So those are the 3 parts of the process of expense entry, reporting period, submission, and payment request / drawdown submission. Now, when it comes to some of the other tools that you'll have at your disposal, relative to the expense tracking and tracking anything that you've submitted or that's been approved, you have a few options, and we can go through all those different options right now. So when you're in your grant itself, I'm going to go back to that grant details page. This was the first page that we looked at today when we actually went into the grant section and then clicked on our grant. Remember, we went through this first page, and when we went through it the first time, there was a lot of zeros here. However, now that we've actually added in expenses, and now that we've actually submitted those expenses and submitted that draw, now I can see some information that has rolled up here. So this is a good kind of first place to look when it comes to checking and reviewing information that you've already submitted. So this shows me the total amount of expenses that I've entered to date, any match that I've entered in that I want to indicate that's been expensed here. This shows me total amount that's been invoiced to date. So any drawdown request that I've created, really anything, the total amount is going to show here. And then these fields reflect kind of where those drawdown requests are in terms of the process. So the pending invoice section shows us how much of the total amount that we've invoiced, how much is pending, meaning how much in terms of the drawdowns that we've requested, how much is still out there awaiting approval. So you can click on it, and this will show me any of my drawdown requests. It'll show me the dates that I've submitted and the status and the amount requested. As soon as this becomes hopefully approved, then pending invoices will go to 0 and approved invoices will go to 62,000. So you'll be able to view this information and keep track throughout the entire process of, when you're tracking your expenses, and then when you begin to invoice and submit those drawdowns, you'll be able to see here, how much is actually submitted versus how much has been approved. And anywhere where you see these green hyperlinks, you'll be able to click and drill down into additional information. So, once you start submitting multiple draws, then all of those draws will appear here. And if you're looking at something and you say, you know what, I don't remember my September draw, or let me take a look at it, you'll always be able to click in the hyperlink on this list, and it'll take you right to that September payment request, for example. So a lot of those fields are dynamic in that they begin to total up when you start to enter in information. And then also clicking on the hyperlinks anywhere, either in those fields or really anywhere throughout your grant record, will allow you to view, will allow you to drill down and view the specific information. In addition to utilizing this as a reporting tool, you'll also have your analytics page for your award. And the analytics page is going to contain a lot of really good mostly financial information, and it shows it in the format of visualizations or in the format of a dashboard. So if I click on the analytics tab now, I have just some basic details of my award that are going to show up here, like the start and the end date. I have some quick view options here. But then if you scroll down, you'll note that you also have some dashboards here that are going to show you some really important information. So for example, what I have here is it shows me my total grant to date, so the total budget amount versus the total that's been spent. I also have a snapshot of last month that appears here. And I have a total snapshot by category as well. So here, what it's showing me is the total amount that I have budgeted versus the total amount that I have expensed by budget category. Any one of these tiles, we call each of these individual graphs or charts a tile. Any one of these can be exported and printed. So if you wanted to show this representation to someone else at your organization, then you'll have the ability. You can click on the little 3 dots in the top right hand corner of any one of these tiles, and you can export in multiple formats. Another thing that you'll be able to do here is you'll note in your icon toolbar in the top right hand corner, you have an option to make this dashboard your homepage. So when I logged in, if you remember when we first started the session today, I had the calendar icon that showed up on the screen. If you want this dashboard to show up automatically when you log in, then just go to the Make Homepage icon here, click the little house icon, and this will make your homepage, when you log in under your username, this will make your homepage this dashboard. In addition to this dashboard, I promised you in the beginning that we were going to spend some time in this reports section right here. If you click on reports and if you go to post award, then you'll have a couple of nice reports that will show you a lot of this information in other ways and with other detail. The grant budget variance report is probably one of the most useful reports that you'll see in terms of the information that's presented on the grant budget variance report. So when I click on the grant budget variance report, it's going to run automatically and show my project. If you have multiple awards, you'll be able to filter in this filters tab right here. One thing you may want to do as you're viewing reports, any reports in AmpliFund, is if you want to make your screen a little bit bigger, then you can collapse this left navigation menu by clicking on this arrow. So you can collapse it, and then that shows a little more, you have a little more screen real estate here for the report. If you wanted to also collapse this filters tab and see more information, then you can find the 3 dots and that'll collapse it there. So what my grant budget variance report shows is for my award, it shows me all of my categories. It shows me my total grant funded amount, the budgeted cash match, and then the budgeted total. And then it shows me the amount of expenses that I have against my totals. So here, these three are showing budgeted grant funded, cash match, and budgeted in kind. If we're not using in kind, but it'll just default on the report. I'll show you how to get rid of that here in a second. And then this shows you the actual spent against each category, including the breakdown of how much you spent against the grant funded amount and how much you spent against the match. And then it provides you with the totals of your expenses and what the budget variance is by percentage there, by dollar amount and by percentage. There are some options that you'll have to interact with this report in real time. So if I expand that filters box out again by finding my my little three dots, my handle here. So you'll notice I can also choose by date range, what date ranges I want to see this information for. So I can use this slider to slide this and show either like a specific month or a specific time frame, or if I want to see the entire grant, you'll be able to slide this out back and forth and you'll be able to see that information. Also, in this filters tab, you'll have the ability to pick and choose which of these categories you want to view. So again, like since we're not reporting match in AmpliFund, then you can check that box and it turns that match column off. If you wanted to export any of these reports, then you'll be able to go to the export section up here and you'll be able to choose export to Excel, PDF, or to a Word doc, rich text format there. So that's our grant budget variance report. We have another expense report that may come in handy, the expense detail report, whereas the grant budget variance report shows the total amount of expenses for a category. This shows the breakdown of each individual expense. So if you have a total amount per category and you want to see, what the breakdown is of how many expenses are rolling up into that total amount, the expense detail report will show you the individual expenses here and the detail of those expenses. And you can view and filter this report by category. So if you just want to see, show me all of my rehab expenses, for example, then I can just click on rehabilitation and it'll show me all of my rehab expenses, for example. So this is a really useful tool as well if you wanted to see detailed list of expenses. You can also click on the export option here as well, as this report can also be exported to Excel or a PDF or a Word doc. So a lot of different reporting options here. We have the grant budget variance report. We have the grant expense detail report. We have on the grant itself, the ability to click on the grant and view some of those dynamic fields, this financial information. And then we have our analytics tab, which shows us visual representation via dashboards and graphs of this information as well. So among the key items that we've covered today in terms of financial reporting, and I know it's been a lot, so I appreciate everyone hanging in there. It was adding the expenses against the budget, and all the considerations that come with that, like adding in the match amount, attaching the source documentation on the expense level, creating that reporting period, creating the drawdown, and then how to access some of the reporting tools that are available to you as well. One of the really nice things about about some of the documentation that is going to be available to you as well is And I'll transition now and I'll talk a little bit about some of the support materials. So you'll have ability to access support documentation, and that is on, and that documentation walks you through the specific actions that we discussed today. So if you go to opportunity.nebraska.gov/AmpliFund, then you'll be brought to your AmpliFund, the AmpliFund page on the DED website, and you'll be able to locate, you go to NAHTF, the documentation that's been uploaded for how to actually go through and do all these different actions that we've looked at today. So please refer to the document that's available. This is specific to the NHTF program, and it walks through all the steps and has all the embedded comments and the nuances of like what needs to be attached and all that. A lot of that is really highlighted in detail on this document right here. Opportunity.nebraska.gov/AmpliFund. Again. Also, you have access to AmpliFund support. So because you're a recipient of DED, and you're an AmpliFund user, then you'll have the ability to access the AmpliFund customer support team as well. And there's a number of ways that you can do that. I mentioned in the beginning that if you look here, there's a help and support icon. In your user drop-down menu, there's a help and support icon. They both bring you to the same place. If you click on any one of those from within AmpliFund, then you'll be brought to our help and support modal, where you'll be able to click here and view the AmpliFund support site. So the AmpliFund support site, if you click on this link, has a number of different AmpliFund specific resources that are general to AmpliFund functionality. If you have specific NHTF AmpliFund questions, then your best bet is to utilize the document that's available on the Nebraska site. But if you're in AmpliFund and you have questions about navigating, or if you forgot something, or if you're looking at a screen and something looks different to you, then you also have the ability to reach out to the AmpliFund support team by submitting a support ticket, which is the second part of this help modal here. So you'll notice that when you generate this help box, it's going to automatically show your name and your email address. If you have an AmpliFund question, like if you have a question about how to close a reporting period, or something like that, or how to adding expenses, you have a question about the expense process, something like that, then put a subject here, a brief description. You can also attach documents. So like if you're looking at a screen and you're confused or you don't remember where something goes, you can attach a screenshot, and you can submit this, and this goes to the AmpliFund help desk, which is open Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Central Time. If you submit a ticket after hours, it gets picked up at the beginning of the next day's work hours. So, don't let that stop you from submitting a support ticket. Feel free to reach out to AmpliFund support, either within AmpliFund itself by, clicking on that eye icon, or you can also just compose a new email and email the AmpliFund support help desk at support@amplifund.zendesk.com. And all those links and all the help and support options are detailed in the slides, which will also be provided to you as follow-up along with this recording. So please feel free, as Lynn mentioned in the beginning, we're very eager and anxious and very willing to work with you and help out in any way possible. So please take advantage of all the support options that you have at your disposal. At this time, I'll pause and we'll take any questions. If you have any questions, you can feel free to ask those or submit those via chat. We can also review any questions that may have come in during the presentation via chat. So I'll take a pause, and we can have our Q&A session now. So feel free to submit or to ask any questions that you may have.
Hi, Dan. This is Lynn.
Hi, Lynn.
Just a couple comments. I know we've had a few questions come in, maybe even privately, just to some of our team members. Recipients have been asking about the documentation they're going to be putting in AmpliFund. And so right now, and per your contract, you are required to provide source documentation for all draws and all expenses against the grant, or against the award. So you need to submit invoices or bills to support the expenses incurred. At this time in AmpliFund, we're not going to require copies of the bank statements and canceled checks supporting the invoices. But we're still working through when we will require, when, if, and how we will require bank statements and canceled checks. So more to come on that. But right now it's just we need invoices and bills to support the expenses being charged against the grant. And that's for the funds being requested and for your cash match in the project. We need to see invoices, expenses incurred for what you're paying with cash match. And then I think there was also a question in regard to the drawdown form. That needs to be signed in blue ink and uploaded in AmpliFund, as Dan mentioned. As long as it's blue ink and uploaded in AmpliFund, there is no reason for you to submit a hard copy in the mail to DED. Our intention is to get away from having to use snail mail. So. But those were a couple questions that came up, I think, that were private or messaged privately to team members. So just so everybody's on the same page. Thanks, Dan.
Lynn, this is Rhonda in Scottsbluff. On that note, if it's easier when we're doing it to do the check and the invoice, can we go ahead and submit the check, or you don't want them?
Yeah, if you have it and you just want to provide it, so then we don't ever have to request it or we don't have to look at it at a monitoring visit, that would be fine too. So you can provide more than what we're requesting, but you have to at least provide the invoice or a bill or some type of source documentation to show expense incurred. Does that answer your question, Rhonda?
Yeah. The other question I had was, if you're doing, like, say you have multiple bills and you're going to do a monthly report, is what he was kind of alluding to, that you'll do a monthly report. Do you have to upload each of those separately, or can you just upload them and put, I mean, you don't need a date of every single expenditure. If it's just September, just put like 20, there's like 20 things for September.
So I think we're going to learn through the process, Rhonda. And so I think it's a good question. And so I would think that you could upload them. So like maybe you have, hopefully I'm understanding your question, right? So maybe you have rehab costs, 10 different invoices to support rehab costs in the month of September. So you would have those like in one PDF document and uploaded into AmpliFund. I would think that would be sufficient, and you would just like, the line item would be rehab, and then you'd have 10 invoices in one upload.
Okay, that's what I wanted.
But I mean, we're going to learn through the process, right? And so work closely with your program rep. And I think through the first few draws, we're going to learn. And so if that doesn't work for us, if it doesn't work for the recipient, we may have to adapt, but just keep in mind, please be adaptable. Please work through the process with us. So, yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I just didn't want to have to upload like 40 different things for the same category. So that's perfect.
Does anybody else have questions? Or Evan, have you received anything else through the chat that should be shared with the group?
So the main chat questions that we had, the drawdown form, please make sure that you're signing it in blue ink and uploading it. And then the drawdown form or the invoices, they're not required to be sent to the office. Just make sure that they're uploaded into AmpliFund. So those are a couple questions that came in on the chat.
Thanks, Evan.
I think a lot of it's like Lynn said earlier, we just have to utilize it before we can answer. We'll have more questions, but right now it's just like kind of overload.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, we realize it may be months until some of you have a draw on your project, and so and we've trained our team on how they're going to use AmpliFund in reviewing your draws, and so we may have to come back and kind of do another training as you guys are starting to use the system more. Oftentimes, so we may not see a draw until January, February. So we're going to continue to work closely with our research team and AmpliFund and to kind of monitor if we need to do additional training on the financial side of this. So keep in close contact with your program rep, and we'll work with you as you're submitting your first draws. And as a team, the first few draws that we get in, we're going to be looking at them together so we can, if Rhonda's draw is the first one to come in, we're going to look at it together so we can kind of all learn and see what recipients are seeing, and we can learn through experience. So
I guess I do have another question. Sorry to be the question hog, but when we're having a pretty big match and you said we have to spend our match first, do we have to spend 100% of it or just in those categories?
yeah, so for example, if you have match in rehab, before you draw any of our rehab money, you have to spend 100% of your rehab money. So, but maybe there's a project that has match in demolition and match in, but no match in new construction. When you're drawing against demolition, you're going to have to use your match first in demolition. But since you have no match in new construction, you can draw the new construction funds without showing any match. Because maybe you're building two houses, one on a property that it's a clear property already, but the second property has an old abandoned house on it, and so that's where you're going to do the demolition. You could draw the new construction money on the first house, and you have no demolition, but then when you go to do the second property, you've got to show the demolition match before you draw any of that demolition money. So, so when you're drawing per category, if you have match in the category, you have to show your match first. Hopefully you follow my example. I wasn't prepared for an example, so.
Well, my question is, I think we put it all in rehab, but can it be changed? Because we'll have to spend like $300,000 before we can draw a dime. And I'm wondering if we should split that into some other categories.
So, Rhonda, let's talk, like it sounds like your question is specific to your project. So let's talk offline. I'd schedule a time to meet with your program rep and if I need to be part of that conversation, or if you're program rep and you can handle it on together, that's fine. But let's take your question offline since it's so specific.
Okay, thank you.
I will say the department had to take a stand in regard to match, and since match was it was a scoring item, and there are projects that got funded because they had match. The department has to require that the cash match go into the project first, because we can't get to the end of a project and the recipient not have put the cash match in, and they got funded over somebody who didn't have match. And so it is, cash match has to go in first per category since it was a scoring item. And that's just across the board on all projects. Rhonda, thanks for not being bashful and asking your questions. Anybody else have questions? So I think we might have had a question regarding like if you're going to be charging time against a grant, whether it's for TAs or general administration. And we want our recipients really to be tracking their time against their awards. And so documentation for like general admin or for any time that's charged against a grant for TA projects, make sure you're tracking your time committed to the project. And so we need to see how you're charging against a grant. So items like timesheets most likely will be necessary to show expenses incurred and to show that proper documentation. Somebody, I'm not exactly sure what the question was, but hopefully that can give you kind of an overview of what we're looking for when you're charging time, personnel time against a grant. Make sure you're logging it against the award. Any other questions? Somebody asked if the training has been recorded. And I believe we are recording the training today. So we should have it available on our website. Evan, we were recording, right? Or did we forget to record? I thought we did record. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's right. I remember we said it at the beginning. So today's training will be is recorded, and so it will be available on the website. Dan, are we going to be sharing any of the screenshots? Will we make that available?
Yeah, the user documentation that's already been posted on opportunity.nebraska.gov/AmpliFund has screenshots in it and different things highlighted on the screenshots, all representative of the things that we went through today. So the user documentation is pretty comprehensive in that it shows not just the step-by-step written instructions, but it does include screenshots of the important screens we went through today.
Thanks, Dan. Anybody else? Good questions. Dan, I appreciate your time in helping train us today and in your continual training throughout this process. It's all new to us. It's kind of fun to learn a new system, and it's fun to have a challenge, right? So thank you everybody for participating, and keep in touch with us, keep in touch with your program reps. If there's struggles you have and we need to provide training in a specific area, let us know. So I hope everybody's staying healthy and safe and looking forward to a good Halloween on Saturday. Do you have any final comments, Dan?
No, I just appreciate everyone's time as always, and I echo your sentiments. Stay safe and have a great Halloween weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Since there's no more questions, we'll probably end the training. Thanks.